Today in Audiobooks for Me, we're going to listen to The Extraordinary Adventures of Arsène Lupin, Gentleman-Burglar by Maurice Leblanc. This book is divided in 3 videos. This is Part 3. We hope you enjoy it. Then Daspry held up, before Varen's bewildered eyes, the little iron plate marked with the 7 red spots. It was a terrible shock to Varen. With livid features, staring eyes, and an air of intense agony, the man seemed to be hypnotized at the sight of it. "Who are you?" he gasped. "One who meddles in other people's business down to the very bottom. What do you want?" "What you brought here tonight?" "I brought nothing." "Yes, you did, or you wouldn't have come. This morning, you received an invitation to come here at 9 o'clock. And bring with you all the papers held by you. You are here. Where are the papers?" There was in Daspry's voice and manner a tone of authority that I did not understand. His manner was usually quite mild and conciliatory. Absolutely conquered, Varen placed his hand on one of his pockets and said, "The papers are here." "All of them?" "Yes." "All that you took from Louis Lacombe and afterwards sold to Major von Lieben?" "Yes." "Are these the copies or the originals?" "I have the originals." "How much do you want for them?" 100,000 francs. "You are crazy," said Daspry. "Why, the Major gave you only 20,000, and that was like money thrown into the sea, as the boat was a failure at the preliminary trials." "They didn't understand the plans." "The plans are not complete." "Then why do you ask me for them?" "Because I want them. I offer you 5,000 francs, not a sou more. 10,000, not a sou less." "Agreed," said Daspry, who now turned to Monouat Andermatt and said, "Monsieur will kindly sign a cheque for the amount." "But I haven't got—" "Your cheque-book? Here it is." Astounded, Mon Andermatt examined the checkbook that Daspry handed to him. "It is mine," he gasped. "How does that happen?" "No idle words, monsieur, if you please. You have merely to sign." The banker took out his fountain pen, filled out the check, and signed it. Varen held out his hand for it. "Put down your hand," said Daspry. "There is something more." Then to the banker he said, "You asked for some letters, did you not?" "Yes, a package of letters." "Where are they, Varen?" "I haven't got them." "Where are they, Varen?" "I don't know. My brother had charge of them. They are hidden in this room. In that case, you know where they are." "How should I know?" "Was it not you who found the hiding place? You appear to be as well informed as Salvatore." "The letters are not in the hiding place." "They are. Open it." Varen looked at him defiantly. Were not Daspry and Salvatore the same person? Everything pointed to that conclusion. If so, Varen risked nothing in disclosing a hiding place already known. "Open it," repeated Daspry. "I have not got the 7 of hearts." "Yes, here it is," said Daspry, handing him the iron plate. Varen recoiled in terror and cried, "No, no, I will not." "Never mind," replied Daspry as he walked toward the bearded king, climbed on a chair, and applied the 7 of hearts to the lower part of the sword in such a manner that the edges of the iron plate coincided exactly with the 2 edges of the sword. Then, with the assistance of an awl which he introduced alternately into each of the 7 holes, he pressed upon 7 of the little mosaic stones. As he pressed upon the 7th one, a clicking sound was heard, and the entire bust of the king turned upon a pivot, disclosing a large opening lined with steel. It was really a fireproof safe. "You can see, Varen, the safe is empty." "So I see. Then my brother has taken out the letters." Daspry stepped down from the chair, approached Varen, and said, "Now no more nonsense with me. There is another hiding place. Where is it?" "There is none." "Is it money you want?" "How much?" 10,000. Monsieur Andermatt, are those letters worth 10,000 francs to you? Yes, said the banker firmly. Varin closed the safe, took the 7 of hearts, and placed it again on the sword at the same spot. He thrust the awl into each of the 7 holes. There was the same clicking sound, but this time, strange to relate, it was only a portion of the safe that revolved on the pivot, disclosing quite a small safe that was built within the door of the larger one. The packet of letters was here, tied with a tape and sealed. Varin handed the packet to Daspry. The latter turned to the banker and asked, "Is the cheque ready, Monsieur Andermatt?" "Yes." "And you have also the last document that you received from Louis Lacombe, the one that completes the plans of the submarine?" "Yes." The exchange was made. Daspry pocketed the document and the cheques and offered the packet of letters to Mon Andermatt. "This is what you wanted, monsieur." The banker hesitated a moment, as if he were afraid to touch those cursed letters that he had sought so eagerly. Then, with a nervous movement, he took them. Close to me, I heard a moan. I grasped Madame Andermatt's hand. It was cold. "I believe, monsieur," said Daspry to the banker, "that our business is ended." "Oh, no, thanks. It was only by a mere chance that I have been able to do you a good turn. Good night." Mont Andermatt retired. He carried with him the letters written by his wife to Louis Lacombe. "Marvellous!" exclaimed Daspry, delighted. "Everything is coming our way. Now we have only to close our little affair, comrade. You have the papers?" "Here they are, all of them." Daspry examined them carefully and then placed them in his pocket. "Quite right. You have kept your word," he said. But what?" "The 2 cheques? The money?" said Varin eagerly. "Well, you have a great deal of assurance, my man. How dare you ask such a thing? I ask only what is due to me. Can you ask pay for returning papers that you stole?" "Well, I think not." Varin was beside himself. He trembled with rage. His eyes were bloodshot. "The money, the 20,000, he stammered. "Impossible, I need it myself." "The money!" "Come, be reasonable and don't get excited. It won't do you any good." Daspry seized his arm so forcibly that Varin uttered a cry of pain. Daspry continued, "Now you can go. The air will do you good. Perhaps you want me to show you the way. Ah, yes. We will go together to the vacant lot near here, and I will show you a little mound of earth and stones, and under it that is false, that is false. Oh, no, it is true, that little iron plate with the 7 spots on it came from there. Louis Lacombe always carried it, and you buried it with the body, and with some other things that will prove very interesting to a judge and jury." Varin covered his face with his hands and muttered, "All right, I am beaten. Say no more. But I want to ask you one question. I should like to know, what is it? Was there a little casket in the large safe?" "Yes." Was it there on the night of the 22nd of June?" "Yes." "What did it contain?" "Everything that the Varin brothers had put in it, a very pretty collection of diamonds and pearls picked up here and there by the said brothers." "And did you take it?" "Of course I did. Do you blame me?" "I understand. It was the disappearance of that casket that caused my brother to kill himself." "Probably. The disappearance of your correspondence was not a sufficient motive, but the disappearance of the casket, is that all you wish to ask me? One thing more, your name? You ask that with an idea of seeking revenge. Parbleu, the tables may be turned. Today you are on top. Tomorrow it will be you." "I hope so. Your name?" "Arsène Lupin." "Arsène Lupin!" The man staggered as though stunned by a heavy blow. Those 2 words had deprived him of all hope. Daspry laughed and said, "Ah, did you imagine that a Monsieur Durand or Dupin could manage an affair like this? No, it required the skill and cunning of Arsène Lupin. And now that you have my name, go and prepare your revenge. Arsène Lupin will wait for you." Then he pushed the bewildered Varron through the door. "Daspry, Daspry!" I cried, pushing aside the curtain. He ran to me. "What? What's the matter?" "Madame Andermatt is ill." He hastened to her, caused her to inhale some salts, and while caring for her, questioned me. "Well, what did it?" "The letters of Louis Lacombe that you gave to her husband." He struck his forehead and said, "Did she think that I could do such a thing? Smearntief! But of course she would, imbecile that I am." Madame Andermatt was now revived. Daspry took from his pocket a small package exactly similar to the one that Monde Andermatt had carried away. "Here are your letters, madame. These are the genuine letters." "But the others?" "The others are the same, rewritten by me and carefully worded. Your husband will not find anything objectionable in them and will never suspect the substitution, since they were taken from the safe in his presence. But the handwriting, there is no handwriting that cannot be imitated." She thanked him in the same words she might have used to a man in her own social circle, so I concluded that she had not witnessed the final scene between Varron and Arsène Lupin. But the surprising revelation caused me considerable embarrassment. Lupin! My club companion was none other than Arsène Lupin. I could not realize it, but he said, quite at his ease, "You can say farewell to Jean Daspry." "Ah! Yes, Jean Daspry is going on a long journey. I shall send him to Morocco. There he may find a death worthy of him. I may say that that is his expectation." "But Arsène Lupin will remain?" "Oh, decidedly. Arsène Lupin is simply at the threshold of his career, and he expects—" I was impelled by curiosity to interrupt him, and leading him away from the hearing of Madame Andermatt, I asked, "Did you discover the smaller safe yourself, the one that held the letters?" "Yes, after a great deal of trouble. I found it yesterday afternoon while you were asleep, and yet God knows it was simple enough. But the simplest things are the ones that usually escape our notice." Then, showing me the 7 of hearts, he added, "Of course I had guessed that, in order to open the larger safe, this card must be placed on the sword of the Mosaic king." "How did you guess that?" "Quite easily. Through private information, I knew that fact when I came here on the evening of the 22nd of June. "After you left me?" "Yes, after turning the subject of our conversation to stories of crime and robbery which were sure to reduce you to such a nervous condition that you would not leave your bed, but would allow me to complete my search uninterrupted." "The scheme worked perfectly." "Well, I knew when I came here that there was a casket concealed in a safe with a secret lock, and that the 7 of hearts was the key to that lock. I had merely to place the card upon the spot that was obviously intended for it. An hour's examination showed me where the spot was." "1 hour?" observed the fellow in mosaic. "The old emperor?" "That old emperor is an exact representation of the King of Hearts on all playing cards." "That's right. But how does the 7 of hearts open the larger safe at one time and the smaller safe at another time? And why did you open only the larger safe in the first instance? I mean on the night of the 22nd of June. "Why? Because I always placed the 7 of hearts in the same way. I never changed the position. But yesterday I observed that by reversing the card, by turning it upside down, the arrangement of the 7 spots on the mosaic was changed." "Parbleu! Of course, parbleu, but a person has to think of those things." "There is something else. You did not know the history of those letters until Madame Andermatt spoke of them before me." "No, because I found in the safe, besides the casket, nothing but the correspondence of the 2 brothers, which disclosed their treachery in regard to the plans." Then it was by chance that you were led first to investigate the history of the two brothers, and then to search for the plans and documents relating to the submarine. Simply by chance. For what purpose did you make the search? Mon Dieu! Exclaimed Daspry, laughing. How deeply interested you are. The subject fascinates me. Very well, presently, after I have escorted Madame Andermatt to a carriage and dispatched a short story to the Echo de France, I will return and tell you all about it. He sat down and wrote one of those short, clear-cut articles which serve to amuse and mystify the public. Who does not recall the sensation that followed that article produced throughout the entire world? Arsène Lupin has solved the problem recently submitted by Salvatore. Having acquired possession of all the documents and original plans of the engineer Louis Lacombe, he has placed them in the hands of the Minister of Marine, and he has headed a subscription list for the purpose of presenting to the nation the first submarine constructed from those plans. His subscription is 20,000 francs. 20,000 francs, the checks of Mon Andermatt? I exclaimed when he had given me the paper to read. Exactly. It was quite right that Varin should redeem his treachery. And that is how I made the acquaintance of Arsène Lupin. That is how I learned that Jean Daspry, a member of my club, was none other than Arsène Lupin, gentleman thief. That is how I formed very agreeable ties of friendship with that famous man, and, thanks to the confidence with which he honored me, how I became his very humble and faithful historiographer. 7th. Madame Imbert's safe. At 3 o'clock in the morning, there were still half a dozen carriages in front of one of those small houses which form only the side of the Boulevard Berthier. The door of that house opened, and a number of guests, male and female, emerged. The majority of them entered their carriages and were quickly driven away, leaving behind only 2 men who walked down Courcelles, where they parted, as one of them lived in that street. The other decided to return on foot as far as the Porte-Maillot. It was a beautiful winter's night, clear and cold, a night on which a brisk walk is agreeable and refreshing. But at the end of a few minutes, he had the disagreeable impression that he was being followed. Turning around, he saw a man skulking amongst the trees. He was not a coward, yet he felt it advisable to increase his speed. Then his pursuer commenced to run, and he deemed it prudent to draw his revolver and face him. But he had no time. The man rushed at him and attacked him violently. Immediately, they were engaged in a desperate struggle, wherein he felt that his unknown assailant had the advantage. He called for help, struggled, and was thrown down on a pile of gravel, seized by the throat, and gagged with a handkerchief that his assailant forced into his mouth. His eyes closed, and the man who was smothering him with his weight arose to defend himself against an unexpected attack. A blow from a cane and a kick from a boot. The man uttered 2 cries of pain and fled, limping and cursing. Without deigning to pursue the fugitive, the new arrival stooped over the prostrate man and inquired, "Are you hurt, monsieur?" He was not injured, but he was dazed and unable to stand. His rescuer procured a carriage, placed him in it, and accompanied him to his house on the Avenue de la Grande Armée. On his arrival there, quite recovered, he overwhelmed his saviour with thanks. "I owe you my life, monsieur, and I shall not forget it. I do not wish to alarm my wife at this time of night, but tomorrow she will be pleased to thank you personally. Come and breakfast with us. My name is Ludovic Imbert. May I ask yours?" "Certainly, monsieur." And he handed Mon Imbert a card bearing the name Arsène Lupin. At that time, Arsène Lupin did not enjoy the celebrity which the Cahorn affair, his escape from the Prison de la Santé, and other brilliant exploits afterwards gained for him. He had not even used the name of Arsène Lupin. The name was specially invented to designate the rescuer of Moulin Imbert. That is to say, it was in that affair that Arsène Lupin was baptized, fully armed and ready for the fray, it is true, but lacking the resources and authority which command success. Arsène Lupin was then merely an apprentice in a profession wherein he soon became a master. With what a thrill of joy he recalled the invitation he received that night. At last he had reached his goal. At last he had undertaken a task worthy of his strength and skill, the Imbert millions. What a magnificent feast for an appetite like his! He prepared a special toilet for the occasion, a shabby frock coat, baggy trousers, a frayed silk hat, well-worn collar and cuffs, all quite correct in form, but bearing the unmistakable stamp of poverty. His cravat was a black ribbon, pinned with a false diamond. Thus accoutred, he descended the stairs of the house in which he lived at Montmartre. At the third floor, without stopping, he rapped on a closed door with the head of his cane. He walked to the exterior boulevards. A tramcar was passing. He boarded it, and someone who had been following him took a seat beside him. It was the lodger who occupied the room on the third floor. A moment later, this man said to Lupin, "Well, Governor?" "Well, it is all fixed." "How?" "I am going there to breakfast." "You breakfast there?" "Certainly, why not? I rescued Mon de Ludovic Imbert from certain death at your hands. Imbert is not devoid of gratitude. He invited me to breakfast." There was a brief silence. Then the other said, "But you are not going to throw up the scheme?" "My dear boy," said Lupin, "when I arranged that little case of assault and battery, when I took the trouble at 3 o'clock in the morning to rap you with my cane and tap you with my boot at the risk of injuring my only friend, it was not my intention to forego the advantages to be gained from a rescue so well arranged and executed. Oh, no, not at all. But the strange rumors we hear about their fortune. Never mind about that. For 6 months I have worked on this affair, investigated it, studied it, questioned the servants, the money-lenders and men of straw. For 6 months I have shadowed the husband and wife. Consequently, I know what I am talking about. Whether the fortune came to them from old Brawford, as they pretend, or from some other source, I do not care. I know that it is a reality, that it exists, and someday it will be mine. Bigre, 100 millions. Let us say 10 or even 5. That is enough. They have a safe full of bonds, and there will be the devil to pay if I can't get my hands on them. The tramcar stopped at the Place de l'Étoile. The man whispered to Lupin, "What am I to do now?" "Nothing at present. You will hear from me. There is no hurry." 5 minutes later, Arsène Lupin was ascending the magnificent flight of stairs in the Imbert mansion, and Mon Imbert introduced him to his wife. Madame Gervaise Imbert was a short, plump woman and very talkative. She gave Lupin a cordial welcome. "I desired that we should be alone to entertain our saviour," she said. From the outset, they treated our saviour as an old and valued friend. By the time dessert was served, their friendship was well cemented, and private confidences were being exchanged. Arsène related the story of his life, the life of his father as a magistrate, the sorrows of his childhood, and his present difficulties. Gervaise, in turn, spoke of her youth, her marriage, the kindness of the aged Brawford, the 100 millions that she had inherited, the obstacles that prevented her from obtaining the enjoyment of her inheritance, the moneys she had been obliged to borrow at an exorbitant rate of interest, her endless contentions with Brawford's nephews and the litigation, the injunctions, in fact, everything. "Just think of it, Monsieur Lupin. The bonds are there in my husband's office, and if we detach a single coupon, we lose everything. They are there in our safe, and we dare not touch them." Monsieur Lupin shivered at the bare idea of his proximity to so much wealth. Yet he felt quite certain that Monsieur Lupin would never suffer from the same difficulty as his fair hostess, who declared she dare not touch the money. "Ah, they are there," he repeated to himself. "They are there." A friendship formed under such circumstances soon led to closer relations. When discreetly questioned, Arsène Lupin confessed his poverty and distress. Immediately, the unfortunate young man was appointed private secretary to the Imberts, husband and wife, at a salary of 100 francs a month. He was to come to the house every day and receive orders for his work, and a room on the second floor was set apart as his office. This room was directly over Monimbert's office. Arsène soon realized that his position as secretary was essentially a sinecure. During the first 2 months, he had only 4 important letters to recopy and was called only once to Monimbert's office. Consequently, he had only one opportunity to contemplate officially the Imbert safe. Moreover, he noticed that the secretary was not invited to the social functions of the employer, but he did not complain, as he preferred to remain modestly in the shade and maintain his peace and freedom. However, he was not wasting any time. From the beginning, he made clandestine visits to Monimbert's office and paid his respects to the safe, which was hermetically closed. It was an immense block of iron and steel, cold and stern in appearance, which could not be forced open by the ordinary tools of the burglar's trade. But Arsène Lupin was not discouraged. "Where force fails, cunning prevails," he said to himself. "The essential thing is to be on the spot when the opportunity occurs. In the meantime, I must watch and wait." He made immediately some preliminary preparations. After careful soundings made upon the floor of his room, he introduced a lead pipe which penetrated the ceiling of Monimbert's office at a point between the 2 screeds of the cornice. By means of this pipe, he hoped to see and hear what transpired in the room below. Henceforth, he passed his days stretched at full length upon the floor. He frequently saw the Imberts holding a consultation in front of the safe, investigating books and papers. When they turned the combination lock, he tried to learn the figures and the number of turns they made to the right and left. He watched their movements. He sought to catch their words. There was also a key necessary to complete the opening of the safe. What did they do with it? Did they hide it? One day, he saw them leave the room without locking the safe. He descended the stairs quickly and boldly entered the room. But they had returned. "Oh, excuse me," he said. "I made a mistake in the door." "Come in, Monsieur Lupin, come in," cried Madame Imbert. "Are you not at home here? We want your advice. What bonds should we sell? The foreign securities or the government annuities?" "But the injunction?" said Lupin, with surprise. "Oh, it doesn't cover all the bonds." She opened the door of the safe and withdrew a package of bonds. But her husband protested. "No, no, Gervais, it would be foolish to sell the foreign bonds. They are going up, whilst the annuities are as high as they ever will be. What do you think, my dear friend?" The dear friend had no opinion. Yet he advised the sacrifice of the annuities. Then she withdrew another package, and from it she took a paper at random. It proved to be a 3% annuity worth 2,000 francs. Ludovic placed the package of bonds in his pocket. That afternoon, accompanied by his secretary, he sold the annuities to a stockbroker and realized 46,000 francs. Whatever Madame Imbert might have said about it, Arsène Lupin did not feel at home in the Imbert house. On the contrary, his position there was a peculiar one. He learned that the servants did not even know his name. They called him Monsieur. Ludovic always spoke of him in the same way. "You will tell Monsieur? Has Monsieur arrived?" Why that mysterious appellation? Moreover, after their first outburst of enthusiasm, the Imbers seldom spoke to him, and, although treating him with the consideration due to a benefactor, they gave him little or no attention. They appeared to regard him as an eccentric character who did not like to be disturbed, and they respected his isolation as if it were a stringent rule on his part. On one occasion, while passing through the vestibule, he heard Madame Imbert say to the two gentlemen, "He is such a barbarian." "Very well," he said to himself, "I am a barbarian." And without seeking to solve the question of their strange conduct, he proceeded with the execution of his own plans. He had decided that he could not depend on chance, nor on the negligence of Madame Imbert, who carried the key of the safe, and who, on locking the safe, invariably scattered the letters forming the combination of the lock. Consequently, he must act for himself. Finally, an incident precipitated matters. It was the vehement campaign instituted against the Imbers by certain newspapers that accused the Imbers of swindling. Arsène Lupin was present at certain family conferences when this new vicissitude was discussed. He decided that if he waited much longer, he would lose everything. During the next 5 days, instead of leaving the house about 6 o'clock, according to his usual habit, he locked himself in his room. It was supposed that he had gone out, but he was lying on the floor surveying the office of Mon Imbert. During those 5 evenings, the favorable opportunity that he awaited did not take place. He left the house about midnight by a side door to which he held the key. But on the 6th day, he learned that the Imberts, actuated by the malevolent insinuations of their enemies, proposed to make an inventory of the contents of the safe. "They will do it tonight," thought Lupin. And truly, after dinner, Imbert and his wife retired to the office and commenced to examine the books of account and the securities contained in the safe. Thus, 1 hour after another passed away. He heard the servants go upstairs to their rooms. No one now remained on the first floor. Midnight. The Imberts were still at work. "I must get to work," murmured Lupin. He opened his window. It opened on a court. Outside, everything was dark and quiet. He took from his desk a knotted rope, fastened it to the balcony in front of his window, and quietly descended as far as the window below, which was that of the Imbert's office. He stood upon the balcony for a moment, motionless, with attentive ear and watchful eye, but the heavy curtains effectually concealed the interior of the room. He cautiously pushed on the double window. If no one had examined it, it ought to yield to the slightest pressure, for during the afternoon he had so fixed the bolt that it would not enter the staple. The window yielded to his touch. Then, with infinite care, he pushed it open sufficiently to admit his head. He parted the curtains a few inches, looked in, and saw Mon Imbert and his wife sitting in front of the safe, deeply absorbed in their work and speaking softly to each other at rare intervals. He calculated the distance between him and them, considered the exact movements he would require to make in order to overcome them, one after the other, before they could call for help, and he was about to rush upon them when Madame Imbert said, "Ah, the room is getting quite cold. I am going to bed. And you, my dear, I shall stay and finish." "Finish? Why, that will take you all night." "Not at all. An hour at the most." She retired. 20 minutes, 30 minutes passed. Arsène pushed the window a little farther open. The curtains shook. He pushed once more. Mon. Imbert turned, and seeing the curtains blown by the wind, he rose to close the window. There was not a cry, not the trace of struggle. With a few precise moments, and without causing him the least injury, Arsène stunned him, wrapped the curtain about his head, bound him hand and foot, and did it all in such a manner that Mon Imbert had no opportunity to recognize his assailant. Quickly he approached the safe, seized 2 packages that he placed under his arm, left the office, and opened the servants' gate. A carriage was stationed in the street. "Take that first and follow me," he said to the coachman. He returned to the office, and in 2 trips they emptied the safe. Then Arsène went to his own room, removed the rope, and all other traces of his clandestine work. A few hours later, Arsène Lupin and his assistant examined the stolen goods. Lupin was not disappointed, as he had foreseen that the wealth of the Imbers had been greatly exaggerated. It did not consist of hundreds of millions, nor even tens of millions, yet it amounted to a very respectable sum, and Lupin expressed his satisfaction. "Of course," he said, "there will be a considerable loss when we come to sell the bonds, as we will have to dispose of them surreptitiously at reduced prices. In the meantime, they will rest quietly in my desk, awaiting a propitious moment." Arsène saw no reason why he should not go to the Imbert house the next day, but a perusal of the morning papers revealed this startling fact. Ludovic and Gervais Imbert had disappeared. When the officers of the law seized the safe and opened it, they found there what Arsène Lupin had left: nothing. Such are the facts, and I learned the sequel to them one day when Arsène Lupin was in a confidential mood. He was pacing to and fro in my room, with a nervous step and a feverish eye that were unusual to him. "After all," I said to him, "it was your most successful venture." Without making a direct reply, he said, "There are some impenetrable secrets connected with that affair, some obscure points that escape my comprehension. For instance, what caused their flight? Why did they not take advantage of the help I unconsciously gave them? It would have been so simple to say, 100 millions were in the safe. They are no longer there because they have been stolen." They lost their nerve. Yes, that is it. They lost their nerve. On the other hand, it is true. What is true? Oh, nothing. What was the meaning of Lupin's reticence? It was quite obvious that he had not told me everything. There was something he was loath to tell. His conduct puzzled me. It must indeed be a very serious matter to cause such a man as Arsène Lupin even a momentary hesitation. I threw out a few questions at random. "Have you seen them since?" "No." "And have you never experienced the slightest degree of pity for those unfortunate people?" "Aye," he exclaimed with a start. His sudden excitement astonished me. Had I touched him on a sore spot? I continued, "Of course, if you had not left them alone, they might have been able to face the danger, or at least made their escape with full pockets." "What do you mean?" he said indignantly. "I suppose you have an idea that my soul should be filled with remorse. Call it remorse or regrets, anything you like. They are not worth it. Have you no regrets or remorse for having stolen their fortune?" "What fortune?" "The packages of bonds you took from their safe." "Oh, I stole their bonds, did I? I deprived them of a portion of their wealth? Is that my crime? Ah, my dear boy, you do not know the truth. You never imagined that those bonds were not worth the paper they were written on. Those bonds were false. They were counterfeit, every one of them. Do you understand? They were counterfeit." I looked at him, astounded. "Counterfeit, the 4 or 5 millions? Yes, counterfeit," he exclaimed in a fit of rage. "Only so many scraps of paper. I couldn't raise a sou on the whole of them, and you ask me if I have any remorse. They are the ones who should have remorse and pity. They played me for a simpleton, and I fell into their trap. I was their latest victim, their most stupid gull." He was affected by genuine anger, the result of malice and wounded pride. He continued, "From start to finish, I got the worst of it. Do you know the part I played in that affair, or rather the part they made me play? That of André Brawford. Yes, my boy, that is the truth, and I never suspected it. It was not until afterwards, on reading the newspapers, that the light finally dawned in my stupid brain. Whilst I was posing as his saviour, as the gentleman who had risked his life to rescue Mon Imbert From the clutches of an assassin, they were passing me off as Brawford. Wasn't that splendid? That eccentric individual who had a room on the second floor, that barbarian that was exhibited only at a distance, was Brawford, and Brawford was I. Thanks to me, and to the confidence that I inspired under the name of Brawford, they were enabled to borrow money from the bankers and other money-lenders. Ha ha! What an experience for a novice, and I swear to you that I shall profit by the lesson. He stopped, seized my arm, and said to me in a tone of exasperation, "My dear fellow, at this very moment, Gervais Imbert owes me 1,500 francs. I couldn't refrain from laughter. His rage was so grotesque. He was making a mountain out of a molehill. In a moment, he laughed himself and said, "Yes, my boy, 1,500 francs. You must know that I had not received 1 sou of my promised salary, and more than that, she had borrowed from me the sum of 1,500 francs, all my youthful savings. And do you know why? To devote the money to charity. I am giving you a straight story. She wanted it for some poor people she was assisting, unknown to her husband, and my hard-earned money was wormed out of me by that silly pretense. Isn't it amusing, huh? Arsène Lupin done out of 1,500 francs by the fair lady from whom he stole 4 millions in counterfeit bonds. And what a vast amount of time and patience and cunning I expended to achieve that result. It was the first time in my life that I was played for a fool, and I frankly confess that I was fooled that time to the Queen's taste." 8th. The Black Pearl. A violent ringing of the bell awakened the concierge of No. 9 Avenue Hoche. She pulled the door string, grumbling, "I thought everybody was in. It must be 3 o'clock." "Perhaps it is someone for the doctor," muttered her husband. At that moment, a voice inquired, "Dr. Harrell, what floor?" "3rd floor, left, but the doctor won't go out at night." "He must go tonight." The visitor entered the vestibule, ascended to the 1st floor, the 2nd, the 3rd, and, without stopping at the doctor's door, he continued to the 5th floor. There, he tried 2 keys. One of them fitted the lock. "Ah, good," he murmured. "That simplifies the business wonderfully. But before I commence work, I had better arrange for my retreat. Let me see. Have I had sufficient time to rouse the doctor and be dismissed by him? Not yet. A few minutes more." At the end of 10 minutes, he descended the stairs, grumbling noisily about the doctor. The concierge opened the door for him and heard it click behind him. But the door did not lock, as the man had quickly inserted a piece of iron in the lock in such a manner that the bolt could not enter. Then quietly he entered the house again, unknown to the concierge. In case of alarm, his retreat was assured. Noiselessly, he ascended to the 5th floor once more. In the antechamber, by the light of his electric lantern, he placed his hat and overcoat on one of the chairs, took a seat on another, and covered his heavy shoes with felt slippers. "Ouf! Here I am, and how simple it was! I wonder why more people do not adopt the profitable and pleasant occupation of burglar. With a little care and reflection, it becomes a most delightful profession. Not too quiet and monotonous, of course, as it would then become wearisome." He unfolded a detailed plan of the apartment. "Let me commence by locating myself. Here I see the vestibule in which I am sitting. On the street front, the drawing-room, the boudoir, and dining-room. Useless to waste any time there, as it appears that the Countess has a deplorable taste, not a bibelot of any value. Now let's get down to business. Ah, here is a corridor. It must lead to the bedchambers. At a distance of 3 meters, I should come to the door of the wardrobe closet which connects with the chamber of the Countess." He folded his plan, extinguished his lantern, and proceeded down the corridor, counting his distance, thus: 1 meter, 2 meters. 3 meters. Here is the door. Mon Dieu, how easy it is. Only a small, simple bolt now separates me from the chamber, and I know that the bolt is located exactly 1 meter, 43 centimeters from the floor. So that thanks to a small incision I'm about to make, I can soon get rid of the bolt. He drew from his pocket the necessary instruments. Then the following idea occurred to him. Suppose by chance the door is not bolted. I will try it first. He turned the knob, and the door opened. My brave Lupin, surely fortune favors you. What's to be done now? You know the situation of the rooms. You know the place in which the Countess hides the black pearl. Therefore, in order to secure the black pearl, you have simply to be more silent than silence, more invisible than darkness itself. Arsène Lupin was employed fully a half-hour in opening the second door, a glass door that led to the Countess's bedchamber. But he accomplished it with so much skill and precaution that even had the Countess been awake, she would not have heard the slightest sound. According to the plan of the rooms that he holds, he has merely to pass around a reclining chair, and beyond that, a small table close to the bed. On the table, there was a box of letter paper, and the black pearl was concealed in that box. He stooped and crept cautiously over the carpet, following the outlines of the reclining chair. When he reached the extremity of it, he stopped in order to repress the throbbing of his heart. Although he was not moved by any sense of fear, he found it impossible to overcome the nervous anxiety that one usually feels in the midst of profound silence. That circumstance astonished him because he had passed through many more solemn moments without the slightest trace of emotion. No danger threatened him. Then why did his heart throb like an alarm bell? Was it that sleeping woman who affected him? Was it the proximity of another pulsating heart? He listened and thought he could discern the rhythmical breathing of a person asleep. It gave him confidence, like the presence of a friend. He sought and found the armchair. Then, by slow, cautious movements, advanced toward the table, feeling ahead of him with outstretched arm. His right had touched one of the feet of the table. Ah, now he had simply to rise, take the pearl, and escape. That was fortunate, as his heart was leaping in his breast like a wild beast, and made so much noise that he feared it would waken the Countess. By a powerful effort of the will, he subdued the wild throbbing of his heart, and was about to rise from the floor, when his left hand encountered, lying on the floor, an object which he recognized as a candlestick, an overturned candlestick. A moment later, his hand encountered another object, a clock, one of those small traveling clocks covered with leather. Well, what had happened? He could not understand. That candlestick, that clock, why were those articles not in their accustomed places? Ah, what had happened in the dread silence of the night? Suddenly a cry escaped him. He had touched, some strange, unutterable thing. No, no, he thought, it cannot be. It is some fantasy of my excited brain. For 20 seconds, 30 seconds, he remained motionless, terrified, his forehead bathed with perspiration, and his fingers still retained the sensation of that dreadful contact. Making a desperate effort, he ventured to extend his arm again. Once more, his hand encountered that strange, unutterable thing. He felt it. He must feel it and find out what it is. He found that it was hair, human hair, and a human face, and that face was cold, almost icy. However frightful the circumstances may be, a man like Arsène Lupin controls himself and commands the situation as soon as he learns what it is. So, Arsène Lupin quickly brought his lantern into use. A woman was lying before him, covered with blood. Her neck and shoulders were covered with gaping wounds. He leaned over her and made a closer examination. She was dead. "Dead! Dead!" he repeated, with a bewildered air. He stared at those fixed eyes, that grim mouth, that livid flesh, and that blood, all that blood which had flowed over the carpet and congealed there in thick black spots. He arose and turned on the electric lights. Then he beheld all the marks of a desperate struggle. The bed was in a state of great disorder. On the floor, the candlestick and the clock, with the hands pointing to 20 minutes after 11. Then, further away, an overturned chair, and everywhere there was blood, spots of blood and pools of blood. "And the black pearl?" he murmured. The box of letter paper was in its place. He opened it, eagerly. The jewel case was there, but it was empty. "Fichtre," he muttered. "You boasted of your good fortune much too soon, my friend Lupin. With the Countess lying cold and dead, and the black pearl vanished, the situation is anything but pleasant. Get out of here as soon as you can, or you may get into serious trouble." Yet he did not move. Get out of here? Yes, of course, any person would, except Arsène Lupin. He has something better to do. Now, to proceed in an orderly way. At all events, you have a clear conscience. Let us suppose that you are the commissary of police, and that you are proceeding to make an inquiry concerning this affair. Yes, but in order to do that, I require a clearer brain. Mine is muddled like a ragout. He tumbled into an armchair, with his clenched hands pressed against his burning forehead. The murder of the Avenue Hoche is one of those which have recently surprised and puzzled the Parisian public, and certainly I should never have mentioned the affair if the veil of mystery had not been removed by Arsène Lupin himself. No one knew the exact truth of the case. Who did not know, from having met her in the Bois, the fair Léontine Zalti, the once famous cantatrice, wife and widow of the Count d'Andillot, the Zalti whose luxury dazzled all Paris some 20 years ago, the Zalti who acquired an European reputation for the magnificence of her diamonds and pearls. It was said that she wore upon her shoulders the capital of several banking houses and the gold mines of numerous Australian companies. Skillful jewelers worked for Zalti as they had formerly wrought for kings and queens. And who does not remember the catastrophe in which all that wealth was swallowed up? Of all that marvelous collection, nothing remained except the famous black pearl. The black pearl. That is to say, a fortune, if she had wished to part with it. But she preferred to keep it, to live in a commonplace apartment with her companion, her cook, and a manservant, rather than sell that inestimable jewel. There was a reason for it, a reason she was not afraid to disclose. The black pearl was the gift of an emperor. Almost ruined and reduced to the most mediocre existence, she remained faithful to the companion of her happy and brilliant youth. The black pearl never left her possession. She wore it during the day and at night concealed it in a place known to her alone. All these facts, being republished in the columns of the public press, served to stimulate curiosity. And strange to say, but quite obvious to those who have the key to the mystery, the arrest of the presumed assassin only complicated the question and prolonged the excitement. 2 days later, the newspapers published the following item. Information has reached us of the arrest of Victor Danègre, the servant of the Countess d'Andillot. The evidence against him is clear and convincing. On the silken sleeve of his liveried waistcoat, which Chief Detective Dudouis found in his garret between the mattresses of his bed, several spots of blood were discovered. In addition, a cloth-covered button was missing from that garment, and this button was found beneath the bed of the victim. It is supposed that after dinner, in place of going to his own room, Danègre slipped into the wardrobe closet and, through the glass door, had seen the Countess hide the precious black pearl. This is simply a theory, as yet unverified by any evidence. There is also another obscure point. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Danègre went to the tobacco shop on the Boulevard de Courcelles. The concierge and the shopkeeper both affirm this fact. On the other hand, the Countess's companion and cook, who sleep at the end of the hall, both declare that, when they arose at 8 o'clock, the door of the antechamber and the door of the kitchen were locked. These two persons have been in the service of the Countess for 20 years and are above suspicion. The question is, how did Danègre leave the apartment? Did he have another key? These are matters that the police will investigate. As a matter of fact, the police investigation threw no light on the mystery. It was learned that Victor Danègre was a dangerous criminal, a drunkard and a debauchee. But as they proceeded with the investigation, the mystery deepened and new complications arose. In the first place, a young woman, Mademoiselle de Saint-Clèves, the cousin and sole heiress of the Countess, declared that the Countess, a month before her death, had written a letter to her and in it described the manner in which the black pearl was concealed. The letter disappeared the day after she received it. Who had stolen it? Again, the concierge related how she had opened the door for a person who had inquired for Dr. Harrel. On being questioned, the doctor testified that no one had rung his bell. Then who was that person? An accomplice? The theory of an accomplice was thereupon adopted by the press and public, and also by Ganimard, the famous detective. "Lupin is at the bottom of this affair," he said to the judge. "Bah!" exclaimed the judge. "You have Lupin on the brain. You see him everywhere." "I see him everywhere, because he is everywhere." "Say rather that you see him every time you encounter something you cannot explain. Besides, you overlook the fact that the crime was committed at 20 minutes past 11 in the evening, as is shown by the clock, while the nocturnal visit, mentioned by the concierge, occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning. Officers of the law frequently form a hasty conviction as to the guilt of a suspected person, and then distort all subsequent discoveries to conform to their established theory. The deplorable antecedents of Victor Danègre, habitual criminal, drunkard and rake, influenced the judge, and despite the fact that nothing new was discovered in corroboration of the early clues, his official opinion remained firm and unshaken. He closed his investigation, and a few weeks later the trial commenced. It proved to be slow and tedious. The judge was listless, and the public prosecutor presented the case in a careless manner. Under those circumstances, Danègre's counsel had an easy task. He pointed out the defects and inconsistencies of the case for the prosecution, and argued that the evidence was quite insufficient to convict the accused. Who had made the key, the indispensable key without which Danègre, on leaving the apartment, could not have locked the door behind him? Who had ever seen such a key, and what had become of it? Who had seen the assassin's knife, and where is it now? In any event, argued the prisoner's counsel, the prosecution must prove, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the prisoner committed the murder. The prosecution must show that the mysterious individual who entered the house at 3 o'clock in the morning is not the guilty party. To be sure, the clock indicated 11 o'clock. But what of that? I contend that proves nothing. The assassin could turn the hands of the clock to any hour he pleased, and thus deceive us in regard to the exact hour of the crime. Victor Danègre was acquitted. He left the prison on Friday about dusk in the evening, weak and depressed by his 6 months' imprisonment. The inquisition, the solitude, the trial, the deliberations of the jury combined to fill him with a nervous fear. At night, he had been afflicted with terrible nightmares and haunted by weird visions of the scaffold. He was a mental and physical wreck. Under the assumed name of Anatole Dufour, he rented a small room on the heights of Montmartre and lived by doing odd jobs wherever he could find them. He led a pitiful existence. 3 times he obtained regular employment, only to be recognized and then discharged. Sometimes he had an idea that men were following him, detectives, no doubt, who were seeking to trap and denounce him. He could almost feel the strong hand of the law clutching him by the collar. One evening, as he was eating his dinner at a neighboring restaurant, a man entered and took a seat at the same table. He was a person about 40 years of age and wore a frock coat of doubtful cleanliness. He ordered soup, vegetables, and a bottle of wine. After he had finished his soup, he turned his eyes on Danègre and gazed at him intently. Danègre winced. He was certain that this was one of the men who had been following him for several weeks. What did he want? Danègre tried to rise, but failed. His limbs refused to support him. The man poured himself a glass of wine and then filled Danègre's glass. The man raised his glass and said, "To your health, Victor Danègre." Victor started in alarm and stammered, No, I swear to you." "You will swear what? That you are not yourself? The servant of the Countess?" "What servant? My name is Dufour. Ask the proprietor." "Yes, Anatole Dufour to the proprietor of this restaurant, but Victor Danègre to the officers of the law." "That's not true. Someone has lied to you?" The newcomer took a card from his pocket and handed it to Victor, who read on it, "Grimaudan, ex-inspector of the detective force, private business transacted." Victor shuddered as he said, "You are connected with the police?" "No, not now, but I have a liking for the business, and I continue to work at it in a manner more profitable. From time to time I strike upon a golden opportunity, such as your case presents." "My case?" "Yes, yours. I assure you it is a most promising affair, provided you are inclined to be reasonable." "But if I am not reasonable?" "Oh, my good fellow, you are not in a position to refuse me anything I may ask." "What is it you want?" stammered Victor fearfully. "Well, I will inform you in a few words. I am sent by Mademoiselle de Saint-Clèves, the heiress of the Countess d'Andillot." "What for?" "To recover the Black Pearl." "Black Pearl?" "That you stole. But I haven't got it." "You have it." "If I had, then I would be the assassin." "You are the assassin." Danègre showed a forced smile. "Fortunately for me, monsieur, the assize court was not of your opinion. The jury returned an unanimous verdict of acquittal. And when a man has a clear conscience and 12 good men in his favor—" The ex-inspector seized him by the arm and said, "No fine phrases, my boy. Now listen to me and weigh my words carefully. You will find they are worthy of your consideration. Now, Danègre, 3 weeks before the murder, you abstracted the cook's key to the servant's door and had a duplicate key made by a locksmith named Outard, 244 Rue Oberkampf." "It's a lie! It's a lie!" growled Victor. "No person has seen that key. There is no such key." "Here it is." After a silence, Grimaudan continued, "You killed the Countess with a knife purchased by you at the Bazaar de la République on the same day as you ordered the duplicate key. It has a triangular blade with a groove running from end to end. That is all nonsense. You are simply guessing at something you don't know. No one ever saw the knife. Here it is." Victor Danègre recoiled. The ex-inspector continued, "There are some spots of rust upon it. Shall I tell you how they came there?" "Well, you have a key and a knife. Who can prove that they belong to me?" "The locksmith and the clerk from whom you bought the knife. I have already refreshed their memories, and when you confront them, they cannot fail to recognize you." His speech was dry and hard, with a tone of firmness and precision. Danègre was trembling with fear, and yet he struggled desperately to maintain an air of indifference. "Is that all the evidence you have?" "Oh, no, not at all. I have plenty more. For instance, after the crime, you went out the same way you had entered. But in the center of the wardrobe room being seized by some sudden fear. You leaned against the wall for support. How do you know that? No one could know such a thing, argued the desperate man. The police know nothing about it, of course. They never think of lighting a candle and examining the walls. But if they had done so, they would have found on the white plaster a faint red spot, quite distinct, however, to trace in it the imprint of your thumb, which you had pressed against the wall while it was wet with blood. Now, as you are well aware, under the Bertillon system, thumb marks are one of the principal means of identification. Victor Danègre was livid. Great drops of perspiration rolled down his face and fell upon the table. He gazed with a wild look at the strange man who had narrated the story of his crime as faithfully as if he had been an invisible witness to it. Overcome and powerless, Victor bowed his head. He felt that it was useless to struggle against this marvelous man. So he said, "How much will you give me if I give you the pearl?" "Nothing." "Oh, you are joking. Or do you mean that I should give you an article worth thousands and hundreds of thousands and get nothing in return? You will get your life. Is that nothing?" The unfortunate man shuddered. Then Grimaudan added, in a milder tone, "Come, Danègre, that pearl has no value in your hands. It is quite impossible for you to sell it. So what is the use of your keeping it? There are pawnbrokers, and someday I will be able to get something for it. But that day may be too late. Why? Because by that time you may be in the hands of the police, and with the evidence that I can furnish, the knife, the key, the thumb mark, what will become of you?" Victor rested his head on his hands and reflected. He felt that he was lost, irremediably lost, and at the same time a sense of weariness and depression overcame him. He murmured faintly, "When must I give it to you?" "Tonight, within an hour." "If I refuse?" "If you refuse, I shall post this letter to the Procureur of the Republic, in which letter Mademoiselle de Saint-Clèves denounces you as the assassin." Danègre poured out 2 glasses of wine, which he drank in rapid succession. Then, rising, said, "Pay the bill and let us go. I have had enough of the cursed affair." Night had fallen. The 2 men walked down the Rue Lepic and followed the exterior boulevards in the direction of the Place de l'Étoile. They pursued their way in silence. Victor had a stooping carriage and a dejected face. When they reached the Parc Monceau, he said, "We are near the house." "Parbleu! You only left the house once before your arrest, and that was to go to the tobacco shop." "Here it is," said Danègre in a dull voice. They passed along the garden wall of the Countess's house and crossed a street on a corner of which stood the tobacco shop. A few steps further on, Danègre stopped. His limbs shook beneath him, and he sank to a bench. "Well, what now?" demanded his companion. "It is there." "Where? Come now, no nonsense." "There, in front of us." "Where?" "Between 2 paving stones." "Which?" "Look for it." "Which stones?" Victor made no reply. "Ah, I see," exclaimed Grimaudan. "You want me to pay for the information." "No. But I am afraid I will starve to death." "So, that is why you hesitate. Well, I'll not be hard on you. How much do you want?" "Enough to buy a steerage pass to America." "All right. And 100 francs to keep me until I get work there." "You shall have 200. Now speak." "Count the paving stones to the right from the sewer hole. The pearl is between the 12th and 13th. "In the gutter?" "Yes, close to the sidewalk." Grimaudan glanced around to see if anyone were looking. Some tramcars and pedestrians were passing, but bah, they will not suspect anything. He opened his pocket-knife and thrust it between the 12th and 13th stones. "And if it is not there?" he said to Victor. "It must be there, unless someone saw me stoop down and hide it." Could it be possible that the black pearl had been cast into the mud and filth of the gutter to be picked up by the first comer? The black pearl. A fortune. "How far down?" he asked. "About 10 centimeters. He dug up the wet earth. The point of his knife struck something. He enlarged the hole with his finger. Then he abstracted the black pearl from its filthy hiding place. "Good. Here are your 200 francs. I will send you the ticket for America." On the following day, this article was published in the Echo de France and was copied by the leading newspapers throughout the world. Yesterday, the famous black pearl came into the possession of Arsène Lupin, who recovered it from the murderer of the Countess d'Andillot. In a short time, facsimiles of that precious jewel will be exhibited in London, St. Petersburg, Calcutta, Buenos Aires, and New York. Arsène Lupin will be pleased to consider all propositions submitted to him through his agents. "And that is how crime is always punished and virtue rewarded," said Arsène Lupin after he had told me the foregoing history of the Black Pearl. "And that is how you, under the assumed name of Grimaudin, ex-inspector of detectives, were chosen by fate to deprive the criminal of the benefit of his crime." "Exactly, and I confess that the affair gives me infinite satisfaction and pride. The 40 minutes that I passed in the apartment of the Countess d'Andillot after learning of her death were the most thrilling and absorbing moments of my life. In those 40 minutes, involved as I was in a most dangerous plight, I calmly studied the scene of the murder and reached the conclusion that the crime must have been committed by one of the house servants. I also decided that, in order to get the pearl, that servant must be arrested, and so I left the wainscot button. It was necessary also for me to hold some convincing evidence of his guilt, so I carried away the knife which I found upon the floor and the key which I found in the lock. I closed and locked the door, and erased the finger marks from the plaster in the wardrobe closet. In my opinion, that was one of those flashes of genius, I said, interrupting. "Of genius, if you wish. But I flatter myself it would not have occurred to the average mortal. To frame instantly the two elements of the problem, an arrest and an acquittal, to make use of the formidable machinery of the law to crush and humble my victim and reduce him to a condition in which, when free, he would be certain to fall into the trap I was laying for him. Poor devil! Poor devil, do you say? Victor Danègre, the assassin. He might have descended to the lowest depths of vice and crime if he had retained the Black Pearl. Now he lives. Think of that. Victor Danègre is alive. And you have the Black Pearl. He took it out of one of the secret pockets of his wallet, examined it, gazed at it tenderly, and caressed it with loving fingers, and sighed as he said, "What cold Russian prince, what vain and foolish Raja may someday possess this priceless treasure? Or perhaps some American millionaire is destined to become the owner of this morsel of exquisite beauty that once adorned the fair bosom of Leontine Zalti, the Countess d'Andillot." 9th, Sherlock Holmes arrives too late. It is really remarkable, Velmont, what a close resemblance you bear to Arsène Lupin. How do you know? Oh, like everyone else, from photographs, no two of which are alike, but each of them leaves the impression of a face, something like yours. Horace Velmont displayed some vexation. Quite so, my dear Devan. And believe me, you are not the first one who has noticed it. It is so striking, persisted Devan, that if you had not been recommended to me by my cousin d'Estevan, and if you were not the celebrated artist whose beautiful marine views I so admire, I have no doubt I should have warned the police of your presence in Dieppe." This sally was greeted with an outburst of laughter. The large dining hall of the Château de Thibermesnil contained on this occasion, besides Velmont, the following guests: Father Gélis, the parish priest, and a dozen officers whose regiments were quartered in the vicinity and who had accepted the invitation of the banker Georges Devanne and his mother. One of the officers then remarked, "I understand that an exact description of Arsène Lupin has been furnished to all the police along this coast since his daring exploit on the Paris-Havre Express." "I suppose so," said Devanne. "That was 3 months ago, and a week later I made the acquaintance of our friend Velmont at the casino, and since then he has honored me with several visits, an agreeable preamble to a more serious visit that he will pay me one of these days, or rather, one of these nights." This speech evoked another round of laughter, and the guests then passed into the ancient Hall of the Guards, a vast room with a high ceiling which occupied the entire lower part of the Tour Guillaume, William's Tower, and wherein Georges Devanne had collected the incomparable treasures which the lords of Thibermesnil had accumulated through many centuries. It contained ancient chests, credences, andirons, and chandeliers. The stone walls were overhung with magnificent tapestries. The deep embrasures of the 4 windows were furnished with benches, and the Gothic windows were composed of small panes of coloured glass set in a leaden frame. Between the door and the window to the left stood an immense bookcase of Renaissance style, on the pediment of which, in letters of gold, was the word Thibermesnil, and below it the proud family device, "Fais si que veux," do what thou wishest. When the guests had lighted their cigars, Devanne resumed the conversation. "And remember, Velmont, you have no time to lose. In fact, tonight is the last chance you will have." "How so?" asked the painter, who appeared to regard the affair as a joke. Devanne was about to reply when his mother mentioned to him to keep silent, but the excitement of the occasion and a desire to interest his guests urged him to speak. "Bah," he murmured, "I can tell it now. It won't do any harm." The guests drew closer, and he commenced to speak with the satisfied air of a man who has an important announcement to make. "Tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, Sherlock Holmes, the famous English detective, for whom such a thing as mystery does not exist. Sherlock Holmes, the most remarkable solver of enigmas the world has ever known, that marvelous man who would seem to be the creation of a romantic novelist, Sherlock Holmes will be my guest." Immediately, Devanne was the target of numerous eager questions. Is Sherlock Holmes really coming? Is it so serious as that? Is Arsène Lupin really in this neighborhood? Arsène Lupin and his band are not far away. Besides the robbery of the Baron Cahorn, he is credited with the thefts at Montigny, Gruchet, and Crasville, and now it is my turn. Has he sent you a warning, as he did to Baron Cahorn? "No," replied Devanne. "He can't work the same trick twice." "What then?" "I will show you." He rose, and pointing to a small empty space between the 2 enormous folios on one of the shelves of the bookcase, he said, "There used to be a book there, a book of the 16th century entitled Chronique de Thibermesnil, which contained the history of the castle since its construction by Duke Rollo on the site of a former feudal fortress. There were 3 engraved plates in the book, one of which was a general view of the whole estate, another the plan of the buildings, and the third, I call your attention to it particularly, the third was the sketch of a subterranean passage, an entrance to which is outside the first line of ramparts, while the other end of the passage is here, in this very room. Well, that book disappeared a month ago." "The deuce!" said Velmont. That looks bad, but it doesn't seem to be a sufficient reason for sending for Sherlock Holmes. Certainly that was not sufficient in itself, but another incident happened that gives the disappearance of the book a special significance. There was another copy of this book in the National Library at Paris, and the two books differed in certain details relating to the subterranean passage. For instance, each of them contained drawings and annotations, not printed but written in ink and more or less effaced. I knew those facts, and I knew that the exact location of the passage could be determined only by a comparison of the two books. Now, the day after my book disappeared, the book was called for in the National Library by a reader who carried it away, and no one knows how the theft was effected. The guests uttered many exclamations of surprise. "Certainly the affair looks serious," said one. "Well, the police investigated the matter and, as usual, discovered no clue whatever." "They never do when Arsène Lupin is concerned in it." "Exactly, and so I decided to ask the assistance of Sherlock Holmes, who replied that he was ready and anxious to enter the lists with Arsène Lupin." "What glory for Arsène Lupin," said Belmont. "But if our national thief, as they call him, has no evil designs on your castle, Sherlock Holmes will have his trip in vain. There are other things that will interest him, such as the discovery of the subterranean passage." "But you told us that one end of the passage was outside the ramparts and the other was in this very room." "Yes, but in what part of the room? The line which represents the passage on the charts ends here, with a small circle marked with the letters TG, which no doubt stand for Tour Guillaume. But the tower is round, and who can tell the exact spot at which the passage touches the tower?" Devanne lighted a second cigar and poured himself a glass of Benedictine. His guests pressed him with questions, and he was pleased to observe the interest that his remarks had created. Then he continued. "The secret is lost. No one knows it. The legend is to the effect that the former lords of the castle transmitted the secret from father to son on their deathbeds, until Geoffroy, the last of the race, was beheaded during the Revolution in his 19th year. That is over a century ago. Surely someone has looked for it since that time." "Yes, but they failed to find it. After I purchased the castle, I made a diligent search for it, but without success. You must remember that this tower is surrounded by water and connected with the castle only by a bridge. Consequently, the passage must be underneath the old moat. The plan that was in the book in the National Library showed a series of stairs with a total of 48 steps, which indicates a depth of more than 10 meters. You see, the mystery lies within the walls of this room, and yet I dislike to tear them down." "Is there nothing to show where it is?" "Nothing." "Mon Devanne, we should turn our attention to the two quotations," suggested Father gaily. "Oh," exclaimed Mon Devanne, laughing, "our worthy father is fond of reading memoirs and delving into the musty archives of the castle. Everything relating to Thibermesnil interests him greatly, but the quotations that he mentions only serve to complicate the mystery. He has read somewhere that 2 kings of France have known the key to the puzzle." "2 kings of France? Who were they?" "Henry IV and Louis XVI, and the legend runs like this. On the eve of the Battle of Arques, Henry IV spent the night in this castle. At 11 o'clock in the evening, Louise de Tancarville, the prettiest woman in Normandy, was brought into the castle through the subterranean passage by Duke Edgard, who, at the same time, informed the king of the secret passage. Afterward, the king confided the secret to his minister Sully, who, in turn, relates the story in his book Royales Economies d'État, without making any comment upon it, but linking with it this incomprehensible sentence: 'Turn one eye on the bee that shakes, the other eye will lead to God.'" After a brief silence, Belmont laughed and said, "Certainly it doesn't throw a dazzling light upon the subject." "No, But Father Galis claims that Sully concealed the key to the mystery in this strange sentence in order to keep the secret from the secretaries to whom he dictated his memoirs. "That is an ingenious theory," said Velmont. "Yes, and it may be nothing more. I cannot see that it throws any light on the mysterious riddle." And was it also to receive the visit of a lady that Louis XVI caused the passage to be opened? "I don't know," said Mondevin. "All I can say is that the king stopped here one night in 1784, and that the famous iron casket found in the Louvre contained a paper bearing these words in the king's own writing, Thibermesnil, March 4th, 11. Horace Velmont laughed heartily and exclaimed, "At last, and now that we have the magic key, where is the man who can fit it to the invisible lock?" "Laugh as much as you please, monsieur," said Father Galis, "but I am confident the solution is contained in those 2 sentences, and some day we will find a man able to interpret them." "Sherlock Holmes is the man," said Mondevin, "unless Arsène Lupin gets ahead of him. What is your opinion, Velmont?" Velmont arose, placed his hand on Devin's shoulder, and declared, "I think that the information furnished by your book and the book of the National Library was deficient in a very important detail which you have now supplied. I thank you for it." "What is it?" "The missing key. Now that I have it, I can go to work at once," said Velmont. "Of course, without losing a minute," said Devin, smiling. "Not even a second," replied Velmont. "Tonight, before the arrival of Sherlock Holmes, I must plunder your castle." "You have no time to lose. Oh, by the way, I can drive you over this evening." "To Dieppe?" "Yes. I am going to meet Monsieur and Madame d'Androl and a young lady of their acquaintance who are to arrive by the midnight train." Then, addressing the officers, Devin added, "Gentlemen, I shall expect to see all of you at breakfast tomorrow." The invitation was accepted. The company dispersed, and a few moments later, Devin and Velmont were speeding toward Dieppe in an automobile. Devin dropped the artist in front of the casino and proceeded to the railway station. At 12 o'clock, his friends alighted from the train. A half-hour later, the automobile was at the entrance to the castle. At 1 o'clock, after a light supper, they retired. The lights were extinguished, and the castle was enveloped in the darkness and silence of the night. The moon appeared through a rift in the clouds and filled the drawing-room with its bright white light. But only for a moment. Then the moon again retired behind its ethereal draperies, and darkness and silence reigned supreme. No sound could be heard save the monotonous ticking of the clock. It struck 2, and then continued its endless repetitions of the seconds. Then 3 o'clock. Suddenly, something clicked like the opening and closing of a signal disc that warns the passing train. A thin stream of light flashed to every corner of the room, like an arrow that leaves behind it a trail of light. It shot forth from the central fluting of a column that supported the pediment of the bookcase. It rested for a moment on the panel opposite like a glittering circle of burnished silver, then flashed in all directions like a guilty eye that scrutinizes every shadow. It disappeared for a short time, but burst forth again as a whole section of the bookcase revolved on a pivot and disclosed a large opening like a vault. A man entered, carrying an electric lantern. He was followed by a second man who carried a coil of rope and various tools. The leader inspected the room, listened a moment, and said, "Call the others." Then 8 men, stout fellows with resolute faces, entered the room and immediately commenced to remove the furnishings. Arsène Lupin passed quickly from one piece of furniture to another, examined each, and, according to its size or artistic value, he directed his men to take it or leave it. If ordered to be taken, it was carried to the gaping mouth of the tunnel and ruthlessly thrust into the bowels of the earth. Such was the fate of 6 armchairs, 6 small Louis XV chairs, a quantity of Aubusson tapestries, some candelabra, paintings by Fragonard and Nattier, a bust by Houdon, and some statuettes. Sometimes Lupin would linger before a beautiful chest or a superb picture and sigh, "That is too heavy, too large. What a pity." In 40 minutes the room was dismantled, and it had been accomplished in such an orderly manner and with as little noise as if the various articles had been packed and wadded for the occasion. Lupin said to the last man, who departed by way of the tunnel, "You need not come back. You understand that as soon as the autovan is loaded, you are to proceed to the Grange at Roquefort." "But you, patron?" "Leave me the motorcycle." When the man had disappeared, Arsène Lupin pushed the section of the bookcase back into its place, carefully effaced the traces of the men's footsteps, raised a portière, and entered a gallery, which was the only means of communication between the tower and the castle. In the centre of this gallery there was a glass cabinet which had attracted Lupin's attentions. It contained a valuable collection of watches, snuff-boxes, rings, chatelaines, and miniatures of rare and beautiful workmanship. He forced the lock with a small jimmy and experienced a great pleasure in handling those gold and silver ornaments, those exquisite and delicate works of art. He carried a large linen bag, specially prepared for the removal of such knick-knacks. He filled it. Then he filled the pockets of his coat, waistcoat, and trousers. And he was just placing over his left arm a number of pearl reticules when he heard a slight sound. He listened. No, he was not deceived. The noise continued. Then he remembered that at one end of the gallery there was a stairway leading to an unoccupied apartment, but which was probably occupied that night by the young lady whom Mondavan had brought from Dieppe with his other visitors. Immediately he extinguished his lantern and had scarcely gained the friendly shelter of a window embrasure when the door at the top of the stairway was opened, and a feeble light illuminated the gallery. He could feel, for concealed by a curtain he could not see, that a woman was cautiously descending the upper steps of the stairs. He hoped she would come no closer, yet she continued to descend, and even advanced some distance into the room. Then she uttered a faint cry. No doubt she had discovered the broken and dismantled cabinet. She advanced again. Now he could smell the perfume and hear the throbbing of her heart as she drew closer to the window where he was concealed. She passed so close that her skirt brushed against the window curtain, and Lupin felt that she suspected the presence of another behind her in the shadow within reach of her hand. He thought, "She is afraid. She will go away." But she did not go. The candle that she carried in her trembling hand grew brighter. She turned, hesitated a moment, appeared to listen, then suddenly drew aside the curtain. They stood face to face. Arsène was astounded. He murmured involuntarily, You, mademoiselle?" It was Miss Nellie, his fellow passenger on the transatlantic steamer, who had been the subject of his dreams on that memorable voyage, who had been a witness to his arrest, and who, rather than betray him, had dropped into the water the kodak in which he had concealed the banknotes and diamonds. Miss Nellie. That charming creature, the memory of whose face had sometimes cheered, sometimes saddened, the long hours of imprisonment. It was such an unexpected encounter that brought them face to face in that castle at that hour of the night that they could not move nor utter a word. They were amazed, hypnotized, each at the sudden apparition of the other. Trembling with emotion, Miss Nellie staggered to a seat. He remained standing in front of her. Gradually, He realized the situation and conceived the impression he must have produced at that moment, with his arms laden with knickknacks and his pockets in a linen sack overflowing with plunder. He was overcome with confusion, and he actually blushed to find himself in the position of a thief, caught in the act. To her, henceforth, he was a thief, a man who puts his hand in another's pocket, who steals into houses and robs people while they sleep. A watch fell upon the floor, then another. These were followed by other articles which slipped from his grasp one by one. Then, actuated by a sudden decision, he dropped the other articles into an armchair, emptied his pockets, and unpacked his sack. He felt very uncomfortable in Nellie's presence and stepped toward her with the intention of speaking to her. But she shuddered, rose quickly, and fled toward the salon. The portière closed behind her. He followed her. She was standing trembling and amazed at the sight of the devastated room. He said to her at once, "Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, everything will be returned. The furniture will be brought back." She made no reply, so he repeated, "I promise it. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Nothing in the world could induce me to break that promise. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Then followed a long silence that he dared not break, whilst the agitation of the young girl caused him a feeling of genuine regret. Quietly, without a word, he turned away, thinking, "I hope she will go away. I can't endure her presence." But the young girl suddenly spoke and stammered, "Listen, footsteps. I hear someone." He looked at her with astonishment. She seemed to be overwhelmed by the thought of approaching peril. "I don't hear anything," he said, "but you must go. You must escape." "Why should I go?" "Because you must. Oh, do not remain here another minute. Go!" She ran quickly to the door leading to the gallery and listened. No, there was no one there. Perhaps the noise was outside. She waited a moment, then returned reassured. But Arsène Lupin had disappeared. As soon as Monsieur de Vannes was informed of the pillage of his castle, he said to himself, "It was Velmont who did it, and Velmont is Arsène Lupin." That theory explained everything, and there was no other plausible explanation, and yet the idea seemed preposterous. It was ridiculous to suppose that Velmont was anyone else than Velmont, the famous artist and club fellow of his cousin d'Estevan. So when the captain of the gendarmes arrived to investigate the affair, de Vannes didn't even think of mentioning his absurd theory. Throughout the forenoon, there was a lively commotion at the castle. The gendarmes, the local police, the chief of police from Dieppe, the villagers, all circulated to and fro in the halls, examining every nook and corner that was open to their inspection. The approach of the maneuvering troops, the rattling fire of the musketry, added to the picturesque character of the scene. The preliminary search furnished no clue. Neither the doors nor windows showed any signs of having been disturbed. Consequently, the removal of the goods must have been effected by means of the secret passage. Yet, there were no indications of footsteps on the floor, nor any unusual marks upon the walls. Their investigations revealed, however, one curious fact that denoted the whimsical character of Arsène Lupin. The famous chronique of the 16th century had been restored to its accustomed place in the library, and beside it there was a similar book which was none other than the volume stolen from the National Library. At 11 o'clock the military officers arrived. De Vannes welcomed them with his usual gaiety, for no matter how much chagrin he might suffer from the loss of his artistic treasures, his great wealth enabled him to bear his loss philosophically. His guests, Monsieur and Madame d'Androl and Miss Nellie, were introduced, and it was then noticed that one of the expected guests had not arrived. It was Horace Velmont. Would he come? His absence had awakened the suspicions of Monsieur de Vannes. but at 12 o'clock he arrived. Devanne exclaimed, "Ah, here you are." "Why, am I not punctual?" asked Valmont. "Yes, and I am surprised that you are. After such a busy night, I suppose you know the news?" "What news?" "You have robbed the castle." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Valmont, smiling. "Exactly as I predicted. But first escort Miss Underdown to the dining-room. Mademoiselle, allow me—" He stopped as he remarked the extreme agitation of the young girl. Then, recalling the incident, he said, "Ah, of course, you met Arsène Lupin on the steamer before his arrest, and you are astonished at the resemblance. Is that it?" She did not reply. Valmont stood before her, smiling. He bowed. She took his proffered arm. He escorted her to her place and took his seat opposite her. During the breakfast, the conversation related exclusively to Arsène Lupin, the stolen goods, the secret passage, and Sherlock Holmes. It was only at the close of the repast, when the conversation had drifted to other subjects, that Valmont took any part in it. Then he was, by turns, amusing and grave, talkative and pensive, and all his remarks seemed to be directed to the young girl, but she, quite absorbed, did not appear to hear them. Coffee was served on the terrace overlooking the Court of Honor and the flower garden in front of the principal facade. The regimental band played on the lawn, and scores of soldiers and peasants wandered through the park. Miss Nelly had not forgotten, for one moment, Lupin's solemn promise. "Tomorrow, at 3 o'clock, everything will be returned." At 3 o'clock, and the hands of the great clock in the right wing of the castle now marked 20 minutes to 3. In spite of herself, her eyes wandered to the clock every minute. She also watched Valmont, who was calmly swinging to and fro in a comfortable rocking chair. 10 minutes to 3, 5 minutes to 3. Nelly was impatient and anxious. Was it possible that Arsène Lupin would carry out his promise at the appointed hour, when the castle, the courtyard, and the park were filled with people, and at the very moment when the officers of the law were pursuing their investigations? And yet, Arsène Lupin had given her his solemn promise. "It will be exactly as he said," thought she, so deeply was she impressed with the authority, energy, and assurance of that remarkable man. To her, it no longer assumed the form of a miracle, but on the contrary, a natural incident that must occur in the ordinary course of events. She blushed and turned her head. 3 o'clock! The great clock struck slowly. 1, 2, 3. Horace Valmont took out his watch, glanced at the clock, then returned the watch to his pocket. A few seconds passed in silence, and then the crowd in the courtyard parted to give passage to 2 wagons that had just entered the park gate, each drawn by 2 horses. They were army wagons, such as are used for the transportation of provisions, tents, and other necessary military stores. They stopped in front of the main entrance, and a commissary sergeant leaped from one of the wagons and inquired for Mon Devanne. A moment later, that gentleman emerged from the house, descended the steps, and, under the canvas covers of the wagons, beheld his furniture, pictures, and ornaments carefully packaged and arranged. When questioned, the sergeant produced an order that he had received from the officer of the day. By that order, the 2nd Company of the 4th Battalion were commanded to proceed to the crossroads of Halleux in the forest of Arques, gather up the furniture and other articles deposited there, and deliver same to Monsieur Georges Devanne, owner of the Tiber-Mesnil Castle, at 3 o'clock. Signed, Colonel Beauvel. "At the crossroads," explained the sergeant, "we found everything ready, lying on the grass, guarded by some passers-by. It seemed very strange, but the order was imperative." One of the officers examined the signature. He declared it a forgery, but a clever imitation. The wagons were unloaded, and the goods restored to their proper places in the castle. During this commotion, Nellie had remained alone at the extreme end of the terrace, absorbed by confused and distracted thoughts. Suddenly, she observed Velmont approaching her. She would have avoided him, but the balustrade that surrounded the terrace cut off her retreat. She was cornered. She could not move. A gleam of sunshine passing through the scant foliage of a bamboo lighted up her beautiful golden hair. Someone spoke to her in a low voice. "Have I not kept my promise?" Arsène Lupin stood close to her. No one else was near. He repeated in a calm, soft voice, "Have I not kept my promise?" He expected a word of thanks, or at least some slight movement that would betray her interest in the fulfillment of his promise. But she remained silent. Her scornful attitude annoyed Arsène Lupin, and he realized the vast distance that separated him from Miss Nellie now that she had learned the truth. He would gladly have justified himself in her eyes, or at least pleaded extenuating circumstances, but he perceived the absurdity and futility of such an attempt. Finally, dominated by a surging flood of memories, he murmured, "Ah, how long ago that was! You remember the long hours on the deck of the Provence. Then you carried a rose in your hand, a white rose like the one you carry today. I asked you for it. You pretended you did not hear me. After you had gone away, I found the rose, forgotten no doubt, and I kept it." She made no reply. She seemed to be far away. He continued, "In memory of those happy hours, forget what you have learned since. Separate the past from the present. Do not regard me as the man you saw last night, but look at me, if only for a moment, as you did in those far-off days when I was Bernard d'Andrézy, for a short time. Will you please?" She raised her eyes and looked at him as he had requested. Then, without saying a word, she pointed to a ring he was wearing on his forefinger. Only the ring was visible, but the setting, which was turned toward the palm of his hand, consisted of a magnificent ruby. Arsène Lupin blushed. The ring belonged to Georges Devanne. He smiled bitterly and said, "You are right. Nothing can be changed. Arsène Lupin is now and always will be Arsène Lupin. To you, he cannot be even so much as a memory. Pardon me. I should have known that any attention I may now offer you is simply an insult. Forgive me." He stepped aside, hat in hand. Nellie passed before him. He was inclined to detain her and beseech her forgiveness, but his courage failed, and he contented himself by following her with his eyes, as he had done when she descended the gangway to the pier at New York. She mounted the steps leading to the door and disappeared within the house. He saw her no more. A cloud obscured the sun. Arsène Lupin stood watching the imprints of her tiny feet in the sand. Suddenly, he gave a start. Upon the box which contained the bamboo, beside which Nellie had been standing, he saw the rose, the white rose, which he had desired but dared not ask for. Forgotten, no doubt. It also, but how, designedly or through distraction? He seized it eagerly. Some of its petals fell to the ground. He picked them up, one by one, like precious relics. "Come," he said to himself, "I have nothing more to do here. I must think of my safety before Sherlock Holmes arrives." The park was deserted, but some gendarmes were stationed at the park gate. He entered a grove of pine trees, leaped over the wall, and, as a short cut to the railroad station, followed a path across the fields. After walking about 10 minutes, he arrived at a spot where the road grew narrower and ran between two steep banks. In this ravine, he met a man traveling in the opposite direction. It was a man about 50 years of age, tall, smooth-shaven, and wearing clothes of a foreign cut. He carried a heavy cane, and a small satchel was strapped across his shoulder. When they met, the stranger spoke with a slight English accent. "Excuse me, monsieur, Is this the way to the castle? Yes, monsieur, straight ahead, and turn to the left when you come to the wall. They are expecting you. Ah! Yes, my friend Devan told us last night that you were coming, and I am delighted to be the first to welcome you. Sherlock Holmes has no more ardent admirer than myself. There was a touch of irony in his voice that he quickly regretted, for Sherlock Holmes scrutinized him from head to foot with such a keen, penetrating eye that Arsène Lupin experienced the sensation of being seized, imprisoned, and registered by that look more thoroughly and precisely than he had ever been by a camera. My negative is taken now, he thought, and it will be useless to use a disguise with that man. He would look right through it. But I wonder, has he recognized me? They bowed to each other as if about to part, but at that moment they heard a sound of horses' feet accompanied by a clinking of steel. It was the gendarmes. The two men were obliged to draw back against the embankment amongst the brushes to avoid the horses. The gendarmes passed by, but as they followed each other at a considerable distance, they were several minutes in doing so. And Lupin was thinking, it all depends on that question. Has he recognized me? If so, he will probably take advantage of the opportunity. It is a trying situation. When the last horseman had passed, Sherlock Holmes stepped forth and brushed the dust from his clothes. Then for a moment he and Arsène Lupin gazed at each other, and if a person could have seen them at that moment, it would have been an interesting sight and memorable as the first meeting of two remarkable men, so strange, so powerfully equipped, both of superior quality and destined by fate through their peculiar attributes to hurl themselves one at the other like two equal forces that nature opposes, one against the other in the realms of space. Then the Englishman said, "Thank you, monsieur." "You are quite welcome," replied Arsène Lupin. They parted. Lupin went toward the railway station, and Sherlock Holmes continued on his way to the castle. The local officers had given up the investigation after several hours of fruitless efforts, and the people at the castle were awaiting the arrival of the English detective with a lively curiosity. At first sight, they were a little disappointed on account of his commonplace appearance, which differed so greatly from the pictures they had formed of him in their own minds. He did not in any way resemble the romantic hero, the mysterious and diabolical personage that the name of Sherlock Holmes had evoked in their imaginations. However, Monodevan exclaimed with much gusto, "Ah, monsieur, you are here. I am delighted to see you. It is a long-deferred pleasure. Really, I scarcely regret what has happened, since it affords me the opportunity to meet you. But how did you come?" "By the train. But I sent my automobile to meet you at the station." "An official reception, eh? With music and fireworks?" "Oh, no, not for me. That is not the way I do business," grumbled the Englishman. This speech disconcerted Devan, who replied with a forced smile, "Fortunately, the business has been greatly simplified since I wrote to you." "In what way?" "The robbery took place last night. If you had not announced my intended visit, it is probable the robbery would not have been committed last night." "When then?" "Tomorrow, or some other day." "And in that case?" "Lupin would have been trapped," said the detective. "And my furniture?" "Would not have been carried away." "Ah, but my goods are here. They were brought back at 3 o'clock." "By Lupin?" "By 2 army wagons." Sherlock Holmes put on his cap and adjusted his satchel. Devan exclaimed anxiously, "But, monsieur, what are you going to do?" "I am going home." "Why?" "Your goods have been returned. Arsène Lupin is far away. There is nothing for me to do." "Yes, there is. I need your assistance. What happened yesterday may happen again tomorrow, as we do not know how he entered, or how he escaped, or why, A few hours later, he returned the goods. "Ah, you don't know." The idea of a problem to be solved quickened the interest of Sherlock Holmes. "Very well, let us make a search, at once, and alone, if possible." Devanne understood and conducted the Englishman to the salon. In a dry, crisp voice, in sentences that seemed to have been prepared in advance, Holmes asked a number of questions about the events of the preceding evening, and inquired also concerning the guests and the members of the household. Then he examined the 2 volumes of the Chronique, compared the plans of the subterranean passage, requested a repetition of the sentences discovered by Father Galis, and then asked, "Was yesterday the first time you have spoken those 2 sentences to anyone?" "Yes." "You had never communicated then to Horace Velmont?" "No." "Well, order the automobile. I must leave in an hour." "In an hour?" "Yes. Within that time, Arsène Lupin solved the problem that you placed before him." "I placed before him—" "Oh." "Yes, Arsène Lupin or Horace Velmont, same thing." "I thought so. Ah, the scoundrel!" "Now let us see," said Holmes. "Last night at 10 o'clock you furnished Lupin with the information that he lacked and that he had been seeking for many weeks. During the night, he found time to solve the problem, collect his men, and rob the castle. I shall be quite as expeditious." He walked from end to end of the room, in deep thought, then sat down, crossed his long legs and closed his eyes. Devanne waited, quite embarrassed. Thought he, "Is the man asleep, or is he only meditating?" However, he left the room to give some orders, and when he returned, he found the detective on his knees, scrutinizing the carpet at the foot of the stairs in the gallery. "What is it?" he inquired. "Look, they're spots from a candle." "You are right, and quite fresh. And you will also find them at the top of the stairs, and around the cabinet that Arsène Lupin broke into, and from which he took the bibelots that he afterward placed in this armchair." "What do you conclude from that?" "Nothing. These facts would doubtless explain the cause for the restitution, but that is a side issue that I cannot wait to investigate. The main question is the secret passage. First, tell me, is there a chapel some 200 or 300 meters from the castle?" "Yes, a ruined chapel containing the tomb of Duke Rollo. Tell your chauffeur to wait for us near that chapel." "My chauffeur hasn't returned. If he had, they would have informed me. Do you think the secret passage runs to the chapel? What reason have—" "And I would ask you, monsieur," interrupted the detective, "to furnish me with a ladder and a lantern." "What? Do you require a ladder and a lantern?" "Certainly, or I shouldn't have asked for them." Devanne, somewhat disconcerted by this crude logic, rang the bell. The 2 articles were given with the sternness and precision of military commands. "Place the ladder against the bookcase, to the left of the word Thibermesnil." Devanne placed the ladder as directed, and the Englishman continued. "More to the left, to the right, there. Now climb up. All the letters are in relief, aren't they?" "Yes." "First, turn the letter I one way or the other." "Which one?" "There are 2 of them." "The first one." Devanne took hold of the letter and exclaimed, "Ah, yes, it turns toward the right. Who told you that?" Sherlock Holmes did not reply to the question, but continued his directions. "Now take the letter B. Move it back and forth as you would a bolt." Devanne did so, and, to his great surprise, it produced a clicking sound. "Quite right," said Holmes. "Now we will go to the other end of the word Thibermesnil, try the letter I, and see if it will open like a wicket." With a certain degree of solemnity, Devanne seized the letter. It opened, but Devanne fell from the ladder, for the entire section of the bookcase, lying between the first and last letters of the words, turned on a pivot and disclosed the subterranean passage. Sherlock Holmes said coolly, "You are not hurt?" "No, no," said Devanne as he rose to his feet. "Not hurt, only bewildered. I can't understand now. Those letters turn... The secret passage opens." "Certainly. Doesn't that agree exactly with the formula given by Sully? Turn one eye on the bee that shakes, the other eye will lead to God." "But Louis XVI?" asked Devanne. "Louis XVI was a clever locksmith. I have read a book he wrote about combination locks. It was a good idea on the part of the owner of Tiber-Mesnil to show His Majesty a clever bit of mechanism. As an aid to his memory, the king wrote, March 4th 11, that is to say, the 3rd, 4th, and 11th letters of the word." "Exactly. I understand that. It explains how Lupin got out of the room, but it does not explain how he entered. And it is certain he came from the outside." Sherlock Holmes lighted his lantern and stepped into the passage. "Look, all the mechanism is exposed here, like the works of a clock, and the reverse side of the letters can be reached. Lupin worked the combination from this side, that is all. What proof is there of that?" "Proof? Why, look at that puddle of oil. Lupin foresaw that the wheels would require oiling." "Did he know about the other entrance?" "As well as I know it," said Holmes. "Follow me." "Into that dark passage?" "Are you afraid?" "No. But are you sure you can find the way out?" "With my eyes closed." At first they descended 12 steps, then 12 more, and farther on 2 other flights of 12 steps each. Then they walked through a long passageway, the brick walls of which showed the marks of successive restorations and, in spots, were dripping with water. The earth also was very damp. "We are passing under the pond," said Devanne somewhat nervously. At last they came to a stairway of 12 steps, followed by 3 others of 12 steps each, which they mounted with difficulty, and then found themselves in a small cavity cut in the rock. They could go no further. "The deuce!" muttered Holmes. "Nothing but bare walls. This is provoking." "Let us go back," said Devanne. "I have seen enough to satisfy me." But the Englishman raised his eye and uttered a sigh of relief. There he saw the same mechanism and the same word as before. He had merely to work the 3 letters. He did so, and a block of granite swung out of place. On the other side, this granite block formed the tombstone of Duke Rollo, and the word Tiber-Mesnil was engraved on it in relief. Now they were in the little ruined chapel, and the detective said, "The other eye leads to God. That means to the chapel." "It is marvelous!" exclaimed Devanne, amazed at the clairvoyance and vivacity of the Englishman. "Can it be possible that those few words were sufficient for you?" "Bah!" declared Holmes. "They weren't even necessary. In the chart in the book of the National Library, the drawing terminates at the left, as you know, in a circle, and at the right, as you do not know, in a cross. Now, that cross must refer to the chapel in which we now stand." Poor Devanne could not believe his ears. It was all so new, so novel to him. He exclaimed, "It is incredible, miraculous, and yet of a childish simplicity. How is it that no one has ever solved the mystery?" "Because no one has ever united the essential elements, that is to say, the 2 books and the 2 sentences. No one but Arsène Lupin and myself." "But Father Jealous and I knew all about those things, and likewise—" Holmes smiled and said, "Monsieur Devanne, everybody cannot solve riddles. I have been trying for 10 years to accomplish what you did in 10 minutes." "Bah! I am used to it." They emerged from the chapel and found an automobile. "Ah, there's an auto waiting for us." "Yes, it is mine," said Devanne. "Yours? You said your chauffeur hadn't returned." They approached the machine, and Munda Devanne questioned the chauffeur. "Edouard, who gave you orders to come here?" "Why, it was Monsieur Velmont." "Montvelmont?" Did you meet him? Near the railway station, and he told me to come to the chapel. To come to the chapel? What for? To wait for you, monsieur, and your friend. Devan and Holmes exchanged looks, and Maurice Devan said, "He knew the mystery would be a simple one for you. It is a delicate compliment." A smile of satisfaction lighted up the detective's serious features for a moment. The compliment pleased him. He shook his head as he said, "A clever man? I knew that when I saw him." "Have you seen him?" "I met him a short time ago, on my way from the station." "And you knew it was Horace Velmont, Arsène Lupin?" "That is right. I wonder how it came." "No, but I supposed it was, from a certain ironical speech he made." "And you allowed him to escape?" "Of course I did. And yet I had everything on my side, such as 5 gendarmes who passed us." "Sacre bleu!" cried Devan. "You should have taken advantage of the opportunity." "Really, monsieur," said the Englishman haughtily, "when I encounter an adversary like Arsène Lupin, I do not take advantage of chance opportunities. I create them." But time pressed, and since Lupin had been so kind as to send the automobile, they resolved to profit by it. They seated themselves in the comfortable limousine, Edouard took his place at the wheel, and away they went toward the railway station. Suddenly, Devan's eyes fell upon a small package in one of the pockets of the carriage. "Ah, what is that? A package? Whose is it? Why, it is for you." "For me?" "Yes, it is addressed, Sherlock Holmes, from Arsène Lupin." The Englishman took the package, opened it, and found that it contained a watch. "Ah!" he exclaimed with an angry gesture. "A watch," said Devan. "How did it come there?" The detective did not reply. "Oh, it is your watch. Arsène Lupin returns your watch, but in order to return it he must have taken it. Ah, I see. He took your watch. That is a good one. Sherlock Holmes's watch stolen by Arsène Lupin. Mon Dieu, that is funny. Really, you must excuse me. I can't help it." He roared with laughter, unable to control himself, after which he said, in a tone of earnest conviction, "A clever man indeed." The Englishman never moved a muscle. On the way to Dieppe, he never spoke a word, but fixed his gaze on the flying landscape. His silence was terrible, unfathomable, more violent than the wildest rage. At the railway station, he spoke calmly, but in a voice that impressed one with the vast energy and will-power of that famous man. He said, "Yes, he is a clever man, but some day I shall have the pleasure of placing on his shoulder the hand I now offer to you, Monsieur Devan, and I believe that Arsène Lupin and Sherlock Holmes will meet again some day. Yes, the world is too small. We will meet. We must meet. And then the further startling and thrilling adventures of Arsène Lupin will be found in the book entitled Arsène Lupin versus Sherlock Holmes.